Baldur's Gate 3 is the game Larian Studios was born to make. Coming off the critical darlings Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, Larian is now digging into possibly the most well-known CRPG series of all time. But as anyone familiar with Baldur's Gate or D&D might tell you, jumping into this world can be overwhelming. So here are 8 things you need to know about Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3 starts with a parasite crawling into your eyeball and infecting your brain. After said brain intrusion, you descend into Avernus, the first of the 9 hells, to start the game's tutorial. That's right, we have bodily mutilation, torture, hell, and even a talking brain with legs. More on that later. Before you start the tutorial, you couldn't dive into the deep end more than that if you tried. It's nothing insanely gory, but actually, I just thought of the brain with legs again. It is insanely gory.
The brain lifts from the skull.
All RPG video games have dice rolls, but most of them are hiding in the game's code. Baldur's Gate 3 embraces the true spirit of D&D by visualizing these rolls during conversation, and even critical hits and saving throws during battle. Being an avid D&D player and dungeon master myself, I love this aspect of the game. Seeing a die actually roll adds a tactile element to the game's RNG. I'd much rather watch that than a simple persuasion failed, or even Divinity's rock-paper-scissors system to settle arguments. And speaking of arguments, I know the concept of opinionated RPG members is nothing new, but Baldur's Gate 3 seems to crank it up to 11. Almost every conversation I had with an NPC affected my party's opinion of me one way or another. Whether it was my Githyanki friend telling me that the starving children were a waste of my time, or the cleric informing me that honesty is not often the best policy, these characters won't forget to remind you that they have their own agency. Actually, take it down a notch, guys. Who are you trying to impress?
It would have been quicker to kill them.
Save scumming. The ever-present friend of the CRPG player. I don't know if it's because I'm used to the permanence of D&D, but every time I F5'd and then reloaded after a bad roll in Baldur's Gate 3, I immediately started having less fun. I'm not trying to tell you how to play the game, and I'm sure I'll have trouble holding myself to the same standard, but try living with your failures. Trying to salvage a horrible situation rather than breeze your way through it is half the fun of D&D. I would, however, take as many saves as you need to get your battle positioning right, as the moment when you're pulled into encounters can be a little hard to predict. Now, which quick save am I looking for again? For anyone used to the Divinity Original Sin series, the top-down gameplay perspective of Baldur's Gate 3 will look very familiar, but once you start conversations or enter a cutscene, the camera cuts in to something much more akin to The Witcher. It definitely took some getting used to after Divinity, but Baldur's Gate 3 is a very cinematic game. It's hard to tell a story as big as the one Larian is telling without some pomp and circumstance, so it's a welcome change. And most of these character models look great up close, in their own horrifying ways, of course. For anyone familiar with the 5th edition of D&D, the concept of long and short rests will come naturally. In Baldur's Gate 3, you can go to your camp from almost anywhere to enter a long rest. By clicking the campfire next to the minimap, it automatically teleports you to a small campfire area where you can build relationships with your allies and even sleep to restore your health and do things like refill your spell slots. It actually reminds me a lot of Dragon Age Origins, a game I played for far too many hours in college.
Enchantment!
After the dozen or so hours I've spent with Baldur's Gate 3, I can say with some surety that it's a game with great bones. Interesting writing, characters, and combat definitely make it an experience worth having. But the polish definitely isn't all the way there yet. I've had frequent T-poses, quite a bit of texture pop-in, and, given the main story's hook of telepathic brainworms, a hilarious bug that makes me unsure if a character's voice is in my head or just not animating correctly.
Be careful. There are goblin traps everywhere.
It's nothing debilitating, but an early glimpse into development is bound to have issues like these in a game this ambitious. A very encouraging sign is that the version that launched in early access already seems to run dramatically better than the preview build I was on recently, so it should only go up from here. And speaking of that ambition, only Act 1 of 3 is included in this early access portion. That may not seem like a lot, but Larian has gone on record saying this should cover around a 25-hour playthrough. So, yes, definitely an RPG.
Come on, dig! Faster! Get her out of there!
And those are just a few of the things to know about the early access release of Baldur's Gate 3. I'm going to jump into the new early access version as soon as I finish speaking here, and I'd suggest fellow RPG fans do the same. For all of our early access preview coverage, keep it locked to IGN.
Today has been a lot.